I am Maribel Roberts, 32 years old, and a financial strategist at Warren Capital for the past 6 years. During that time, my ideas have been consistently overlooked, my voice silenced in boardrooms, dominated by men who took my concepts and claimed them as their own. Alexander Bailey, our CEO, was the worst offender with his dismissive smirks whenever I spoke. Little did he know that on that fateful Thursday morning, his mockery of my phantom investor would backfire, spectacularly changing the power dynamics forever. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from. In the comments below, hit the like button and subscribe to follow more stories of workplace justice. My journey at Warren Capital began long before that pivotal board meeting. After graduating with distinction from Princeton Business School, I built my early career at a boutique investment firm in Chicago. My work there caught the attention of several larger firms, but Warren Capital stood out with their promises of growth, innovation, and the chance to make a meaningful impact in the financial industry. At 26, ambitious and full of ideas, I accepted their offer without hesitation. The first year seemed promising. I worked 80-hour weeks, developed comprehensive investment strategies, and created innovative financial models that earned praise from some department heads. I still remember the excitement I felt when presenting my first major proposal for restructuring our approach to emerging market investments. The initial feedback was positive, and I believed I had found a place where my talents would be recognized. That illusion shattered quickly when I saw my exact strategy implemented 3 months later with one key difference. Alexander Bailey presented it as his own brainchild. There was no acknowledgement of my work, not even a cursory mention of my contribution. When I raised this with my direct supervisor, Robert Klein, he shrugged it off. Robert leaned back in his leather chair, barely looking up from his phone. That is how things work here, Maribel. Good ideas rise to the top. Be a team player. Alexander Bailey embodied every stereotype of the charismatic but ultimately toxic CEO. With his Stanford MBA perfect smile and tailored suits, he charmed clients and investors alike. The press loved him for his bold statements and seeming market prescience. Forbes had even featured him as one of their financial visionaries under 40. What the glossy features failed to capture was his calculated dismissal of anyone he perceived as threatening his spotlight, particularly women with strong ideas. The Bailey Boys. Everyone called his inner circle of executives 6 men who had either attended Stanford with him or worked together at his previous firm. They formed an impenetrable barrier around him, controlling access and information flow throughout the company. As a woman who had not attended Stanford and lacked the right connections, I found myself perpetually on the outside looking in. Amanda Chen from legal was one of the few allies I found in this environment. We bonded over lunch one day when she witnessed Alexander interrupt me 8 times during a strategy meeting. "He does that to all the women," she said, picking at her salad. "I have been keeping track in meetings. Men are allowed to finish their thoughts 90% of the time. Women barely make it to 40%. Our friendship grew from there, providing essential emotional support in an increasingly hostile workplace. Amanda had been with the company for 4 years longer than me and understood its inner workings intimately. About 2 years into my time at Warren, she shared something concerning. "The company is not as financially stable as Alexander claims," she said, sliding a folder across my desk after hours when the office was nearly empty. "I saw these documents during a legal review. Our debt load is substantial, and we are barely meeting our obligations." The documents revealed an $80 million loan from Harrison Financial Partners that was coming due for renewal in 18 months. Despite Alexander's public bravado about record profits, The company was walking a precarious financial line. This knowledge gave context to the growing tension I had been sensing in executive meetings. Meanwhile, the industry landscape was evolving rapidly. New fintech companies were disrupting traditional investment models, and clients were increasingly demanding innovative approaches. Despite this, Warren Capital remained rigidly committed to conventional strategies, the very approaches I had repeatedly suggested modernizing. The pattern of dismissal continued. In meetings, I would raise a point only to be talked over or have my idea dismissed. Days or weeks later, one of the Bailey boys would present essentially the same concept to enthusiastic response from Alexander. The emotional toll was substantial. I began to doubt my instincts, my abilities, even my sanity. Was I imagining the pattern? Was I simply not communicating effectively? The most egregious example came during our annual strategic planning session. I had prepared a comprehensive analysis of digital engagement strategies that could increase our client acquisition by 30%. My presentation was scheduled for 10 minutes, but Alexander cut me off after 3. "We need actionable strategies, not theoretical exercises," he said dismissively. 2 weeks later, Jason Miller, one of the inner circle, presented what was essentially my digital engagement plan with minor cosmetic changes. Alexander praised it as exactly the innovative thinking we need. Despite the growing evidence that my contributions would never be recognized at Warren Capital, I remained determined to make meaningful change. If the front door was closed to me, I would find another way in. I began researching potential investors and partners who might be interested in the innovative approaches. Warren was rejecting carefully documenting my ideas and their subsequent appropriation. What started as a defensive measure gradually evolved into something more ambitious. The financial industry was changing, and somewhere out there had to be people who could recognize the value I brought to the table without feeling threatened by it. Little did I know that opportunity was about to arrive at an industry conference in Boston that would change everything. The annual Financial Innovation Summit in Boston came at a perfect time. Alexander had originally planned to attend himself, but a last-minute meeting with major clients in Los Angeles meant the company needed another representative. Since the conference focused heavily on emerging technologies in finance, precisely my area of expertise, I was reluctantly selected to go. "Just take notes and report back," Robert instructed, making it clear this was not an opportunity for me to actually represent the company in any meaningful capacity. No need to speak up in the sessions. I nodded agreeably, while inwardly rejecting his limitation. The moment I stepped into the conference center, a weight lifted from my shoulders. For 3 days I could escape the stifling atmosphere of Warren Capital and immerse myself in conversations about the future of finance. During a panel discussion on algorithmic trading strategies, I asked a question about regulatory implications that sparked an extended conversation. The moderator seemed impressed, inviting me to elaborate on my point. For the first time in years, my perspective was not only heard, but actively sought after. As attendees filtered out after the session, a woman in a perfectly tailored navy suit approached me. "That was an excellent question," she said, extending her hand. "You articulated something I have been thinking about for months. I am Natalie Harrison, CFO of Harrison Financial Partners." The name immediately registered. Harrison Financial was one of the largest private investment firms on the East Coast, known for both traditional lending and forward-thinking investment in financial technology, and they held Warren Capital's $80 million loan. Maribel Roberts, Warren Capital. I replied, hoping my sudden recognition did not show on my face. Natalie smiled. Would you be interested in continuing this conversation over coffee? I would love to hear more about your thoughts on regulatory adaptation to algorithmic innovation. That coffee turned into a 2-hour conversation about the future of financial services, during which I carefully avoided mentioning any proprietary information from Warren Capital while still demonstrating my expertise. Natalie was refreshingly straightforward, lacking the political maneuvering I had become accustomed to in professional conversations. "You clearly understand where this industry is heading," she said as our meeting concluded. "Warren Capital is fortunate to have someone with your insight on their team." I must have made a face because she raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Let me guess," she said. "Your insights are not always appreciated." "Something like that," I admitted cautiously. "Are you free for dinner tonight? I would like to introduce you to some colleagues." Dinner that evening was with Natalie and 2 other Harrison executives in a private dining room at an upscale restaurant. The conversation flowed easily as we discussed market trends, regulatory challenges, and technological opportunities. I found myself speaking more freely than I had in years, energized by their genuine interest in my perspectives. "The problem with traditional firms," I explained, "is they see technology as a threat rather than an opportunity. They make surface-level changes while clinging to outdated models that will ultimately fail in the new environment." "And what would you do differently?" asked Thomas Reed Harrison's head of strategic investments. Without revealing specifics about Warren, I outlined my vision for integrating algorithmic trading with human expertise, creating more responsive investment strategies for clients while reducing operational costs. I described the resistance such ideas typically faced in established firms and the cultural changes needed to implement them successfully. By the end of dinner, Natalie handed me her business card with her personal cell number written on the back. "I would like to continue this conversation," she said. "Call me next week." On the flight back to New York, I could barely contain my excitement. For the first time in years, I had been taken seriously as a financial professional. More than that, I had connected with executives from a firm that could potentially provide the resources to implement my ideas either at Warren or elsewhere. Back at the office, I channeled this energy into creating a preliminary investment proposal. If Harrison Financial was interested in forward-thinking financial strategies, perhaps they might be interested in directly investing in Warren Capital with the specific purpose of modernizing our approach. This would require delicate handling given their position as our lender, but the potential benefits were substantial. I shared my thoughts with Amanda, who provided critical legal perspectives on how such an investment might be structured. "This could actually work," she said, reviewing my initial draft. "But Alexander will feel threatened. His control would be diluted." "Not if the investment focuses on creating a new division rather than changing existing operations," I countered. "He maintains control of current business while we build something new alongside it." The idea gradually took shape. I carefully selected a few trusted colleagues to provide input, including Jason from marketing, who, despite being friendly with Alexander, had always treated me with respect. "This is brilliant," Jason said after reviewing my proposal. "The market is ready for exactly this approach." Within days, word of my side project reached Alexander. I was called into his office on a Thursday afternoon, finding him seated behind his massive desk, deliberately making me wait while he finished an email. "I understand you have been working on some extracurricular activities," he said finally, looking up with cold eyes. "Something about a new investment structure." "I have been developing a proposal that could help Warren Capital expand into new markets," I replied carefully. "Any such initiatives need to go through proper channels," he said. "Through your supervisor to me through the appropriate strategic planning processes. We cannot have employees freelancing on company strategy." Of course, I agreed outwardly. I was merely preparing ideas for the next planning cycle. His smile did not reach his eyes. "Just remember where your loyalties should lie, Maribel. This company has been very good to you." That evening, I discovered my work email had been accessed, and several files related to my proposal had been viewed. Thankfully, I had kept the most detailed versions on my personal cloud storage. Amanda helped me secure my communications going forward, setting up encrypted channels for sharing sensitive documents. "Be careful," she warned. "They are watching you now." The warning only strengthened my determination. That weekend, I had my first detailed call with Natalie about a potential investment structure. Her interest was genuine, and she asked insightful questions about implementation and revenue projections. "This aligns with directions we have been considering," she said. "Let me discuss this with our investment committee and get back to you." The seed was planted. Now I had to nurture it carefully while navigating increasingly hostile corporate waters. Over the next several weeks, I balanced my regular work responsibilities with further development of my investment proposal. Natalie arranged a formal meeting with Harrison's investment team, requiring me to take a personal day to avoid raising suspicions at Warren Capital. The meeting went exceptionally well, with the team asking detailed questions about market positioning and competitive advantage. "We are potentially interested at the $25 million level," Natalie informed me afterward. "Possibly up to $50 million, if certain conditions are met." Meanwhile, Warren Capital's quarterly report revealed concerning trends. Profits were down 12% year over year, and client acquisition had slowed dramatically. Alexander called an emergency executive meeting announcing cost-cutting measures, including a hiring freeze and reduced bonuses. "These are temporary adjustments. While we navigate market headwinds," he assured everyone, but the tension in the room was palpable. Rumors of potential layoffs began circulating through the office, creating an atmosphere of anxiety and uncertainty. In this environment, Alexander became even more territorial about credit for successful initiatives. During a client presentation, he claimed my digital engagement strategy had been his vision from the beginning. "I recognized early that we needed to transform our client communication approach," he told the room, making direct eye contact with me, as if daring me to contradict him. Meanwhile, my relationship with Natalie continued to develop. Our regular calls evolved beyond the investment proposal to broader industry discussions, with her providing invaluable mentorship. She shared her experiences navigating male-dominated spaces and offered strategic advice on positioning my ideas. "The investment committee is increasingly interested," she informed me during one call. "The initial $25 million figure might be conservative. We are now considering up to $50 million for the right structure." These conversations kept me going through increasingly difficult days at Warren Capital. I worked late nights refining the proposal, adding detailed implementation timelines and governance structures. Every aspect needed to be perfect if I was going to overcome the inevitable resistance. A chance encounter changed everything. While waiting in Harrison's reception area for a scheduled meeting with Natalie, I struck up a conversation with Mark Stevens, one of their loan officers. "Warren Capital, right?" he said when I mentioned my employer. "Interesting timing with the $80 million loan renewal coming up." "Renewal?" I asked carefully. "The facility is coming due in 6 months," he said. "Negotiations should be starting soon." 6 months, not 18, as Amanda's documents had indicated. Either the timeline had accelerated, or Alexander had been hiding the true situation. Of course, I responded neutrally. I am sure our CFO has everything well in hand." When I raised this discrepancy with Amanda, she looked deeply concerned. "I will see what I can find out, but be careful," she warned. "If the company's financial situation is worse than reported, asking questions could make you a target." Her caution proved prescient. Within days, I noticed a distinct change in how Alexander interacted with me. His previous dismissiveness transformed into outright hostility. In meetings, he would pointedly ask others for input while ignoring my raised hand. My name disappeared from invitation lists for strategic discussions, and I found myself reassigned to less impactful projects. "They know something," Amanda told me, after one particularly tense executive meeting. I overheard Benjamin and Robert discussing the need to address the Maribel situation in Alexander's office yesterday. Despite this growing isolation, I continued refining my proposal and building my relationship with Harrison Financial. The potential investment had grown to $50 million, with specific provisions for creating a new digital investment division under my leadership. Natalie had even hinted at the possibility of a position directly with Harrison if things at Warren became untenable. After weeks of preparation, I formally requested an opportunity to present my proposal to the board of directors. Alexander initially ignored the request, but when I copied all board members, he had no choice but to acknowledge it. "We can allocate 10 minutes at the end of next week's board meeting," he responded curtly. "Please submit all materials for review beforehand." The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. I submitted my presentation slides on Monday, knowing they would be scrutinized for any weaknesses. Wednesday night, I stayed at the office until midnight, anticipating potential questions and preparing responses. When I finally went home, I felt both exhausted and exhilarated. After years of being overlooked and undervalued, I was finally taking control of my professional destiny. As I laid out my outfit for the next morning, a conservative but confident charcoal suit with subtle pinstripes, I knew everything would change tomorrow. I just did not anticipate how dramatic that change would be. Thursday dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring morning that normally would have lifted my spirits. I dressed carefully in my chosen suit, adding pearl earrings my grandmother had given me when I graduated from Princeton, a small talisman of strength for what I knew would be a challenging day. The atmosphere in the office was strange from the moment I arrived. Conversations stopped when I approached, and colleagues who normally greeted me warmly suddenly found their computer screens fascinating as I passed. Alexander, typically stone-faced in my presence lately, was unnaturally cheerful, stopping by my desk with a broad smile. "Big day, Maribel," he said, rocking slightly on his heels. "Looking forward to your presentation." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. His confidence was unsettling, suggesting he knew something I did not. The boardroom at Warren Capital occupied the entire northeast corner of our floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The massive mahogany table seated 20, though our board consisted of only 12 members. When I entered, most were already seated, engaged in pre-meeting small talk. Several avoided eye contact, while others gave me strange, almost sympathetic looks. Alexander sat at the head of the table, flanked by his most loyal allies from the board. He gestured casually to an empty seat far down the table, positioned so that I would have my back to the windows, the glare potentially obscuring my slides on the projection screen. "Maribel, join us," he said, with exaggerated courtesy. "We have saved you a seat." I nodded politely and took the assigned place, subtly adjusting my chair to avoid the worst of the glare. As I arranged my notepad and tablet, I noticed Amanda slip into the room, taking a seat along the wall with other non-board executives who were there to observe. She gave me a barely perceptible nod of encouragement. The meeting began with standard updates, financial reports, operational metrics, client acquisition numbers. Everything suggested business as usual, though I noted the careful language used to describe our debt obligations. Nothing technically false, but certainly misleading to anyone not familiar with our true financial position. Now, Alexander said, after nearly 2 hours of regular business, we have a special presentation from Maribel Roberts, who believes she has identified a potential investment opportunity for the company. His tone carried a subtle mockery that was not lost on the room. Several board members shifted uncomfortably while others leaned forward with curious expressions. I connected my tablet to the presentation system and moved to the front of the room. Years of having my ideas dismissed had prepared me for skepticism, but I believed in the strength of my proposal and the support of Harrison Financial. "Good morning," I began confidently. "Today I would like to present an opportunity to secure strategic investment that would allow Warren Capital to establish a leading position in digital investment services." My first few slides outlined the market opportunity and competitive landscape, highlighting the gap that existing firms had failed to address. I was just beginning to detail the proposed structure when Alexander raised his hand, a theatrical gesture designed to interrupt rather than request clarification. "Before you continue, Maribel," he said with exaggerated patience, "perhaps you should tell the board more about this phantom investor of yours." The emphasis on phantom sent a clear message, and several of his allies chuckled on cue. Alexander continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "The board should know that Maribel has been conducting unauthorized negotiations with outside parties, making promises and representations without any authority to do so, all while using company time and resources." My heart raced as the ambush became clear. He had known about my conversations with Harrison, but rather than addressing them privately, he had chosen to humiliate me publicly. "These fantasy investors she has supposedly interested in our company," he continued, "remain conveniently unnamed and unverifiable." More laughter followed, harder this time. I felt heat rising in my face, my carefully prepared presentation crumbling in the face of this orchestrated ridicule. For a moment, I was transported back to every meeting where my voice had been silenced, every instance where my contributions had been dismissed or stolen. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Glancing down, I saw a text from Natalie: "Meeting ended early. Available now if needed." In that moment, something crystallized within me. After 6 years of dismissal and underestimation, of watching less qualified men take credit for my work, of being talked over and marginalized, I was done accepting their narrative. The humiliation burning through me transformed into cold, clear resolve. I looked around the boardroom, taking in the smug expressions, the uncomfortable glances, the few sympathetic eyes. Amanda gave me the slightest nod, a silent encouragement in a room full of doubt. I took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. The room waited for my response, Alexander's allies still wearing amused expressions, while other board members looked uncomfortable or embarrassed on my behalf. The CEO himself leaned back in his chair, arms crossed in triumph, clearly believing he had neutralized both me and my proposal in one devastating blow. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I would be happy to introduce you to Harrison Financial Partners right now." Alexander's smile faltered slightly, but his confidence remained intact. "By all means," he said with a dismissive wave. "Put your phantom investor on speakerphone." "I think a video call would be more appropriate," I replied, turning to my tablet, given the importance of the discussion. As I set up the call, I could sense Alexander's growing unease. He had expected me to back down, to admit defeat, or make excuses. Instead, I was calling what he assumed was a bluff. "Is this really necessary?" Robert Klein interjected. "We have other matters to discuss." "I believe the board deserves to hear directly from Harrison Financial," I said, firmly initiating the connection to Natalie. The seconds it took for the call to connect felt eternal. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Alexander maintained his composed expression, but I noticed a muscle twitching in his jaw. Then the large screen at the front of the room illuminated with Natalie Harrison's face, her professional appearance, and well-appointed office visible to everyone. "Maribel," she smiled warmly. "Is this the board meeting you mentioned?" "Yes," I confirmed, watching Alexander's expression transform from smug certainty to shock. "Natalie, I would like to introduce you to our board of directors. Everyone, this is Natalie Harrison, CFO of Harrison Financial Partners." The recognition was immediate. Harrison Financial was not some obscure investment group I had fabricated. It was one of the most respected financial institutions on the East Coast, and more significantly, the primary holder of Warren Capital's $80 million loan. "It is a pleasure to meet you all," Natalie said professionally. "We have been having productive discussions with Maribel about a potential strategic investment in Warren Capital's digital expansion." Alexander's face had gone pale, but he quickly attempted to regain control of the situation. "Miss Harrison," he said, his voice strained, despite his attempt at a welcoming tone, "this is unexpected. We were unaware of any formal discussions between our companies outside of our existing relationship." Maribel approached us with a compelling vision for how Warren Capital could establish leadership in digital investment services. Natalie replied, "Given our existing relationship as your primary lender, we felt it presented an interesting opportunity to deepen our partnership." The atmosphere in the room had transformed completely. Board members who had been chuckling at Alexander's mockery minutes earlier now sat up straight, giving their full attention to the screen. The investment committee chair, Eleanor Wilson, leaned forward. "Miss Harrison, what level of investment is Harrison Financial considering?" she asked. "Our investment committee has authorized me to discuss terms in the $50 million range, subject to due diligence and governance agreements," Natalie replied. "We see significant potential in the strategy Maribel has outlined." Eleanor turned to me with newfound respect. "Please continue your presentation, Maribel." With Natalie's virtual presence lending credibility to every slide, I resumed my presentation with renewed confidence. I outlined the proposed structure for a new digital investment division, the technology infrastructure required, and the projected revenue streams. When board members raised questions about implementation challenges or market positioning, I provided detailed, thoughtful responses, occasionally supported by additional context from Natalie. Alexander attempted several times to redirect the conversation, suggesting that any such initiative should be handled through established channels and appropriate leadership. But his objections fell flat against the board's growing enthusiasm for the proposal. The key benefit, I explained, approaching my conclusion, is that this structure allows Warren Capital to establish leadership in an emerging market segment without disrupting existing business lines. It represents growth and evolution rather than replacement. And Harrison Financial is prepared to be the primary investor in this initiative, asked Thomas Jenkins, another board member. "Yes," Natalie confirmed. "Subject to the conditions outlined in Maribel's presentation, including appropriate leadership and operational independence for the new division." The implication was clear: the investment was tied to my continued involvement. Several board members nodded thoughtfully while Alexander stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. As the presentation concluded, Eleanor suggested establishing a board subcommittee to review the proposal in detail and work with Harrison Financial on due diligence. Alexander had no choice but to agree, though he quickly nominated himself and 2 allies to serve on the committee. "I think broader representation would be beneficial," Eleanor countered diplomatically. "Perhaps you, myself, Thomas, and Barbara could form the initial group with Maribel as the key liaison to Harrison." With the board clearly supportive, Alexander could not openly object. As the meeting adjourned, Natalie thanked everyone for their time and expressed enthusiasm for continued discussions. The screen went dark, but her impact remained, having transformed me from an object of ridicule to a respected strategic voice in the span of 30 minutes. As board members gathered their materials, several approached me with congratulations and questions about the proposal. Alexander and his closest allies huddled at the far end of the room, their low voices and tense expressions conveying their displeasure at this unexpected turn of events. Amanda caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle thumbs up. In that moment, standing in the boardroom where I had been humiliated just an hour earlier, I felt a profound shift in the ground beneath my feet. The path forward would not be easy, but for the first time in years I had regained control of my professional narrative. The hallway outside the boardroom buzzed with activity as the meeting dispersed. Board members and executives clustered in small groups, their conversations hushed but animated. I received several congratulatory nods and even a few direct compliments as I made my way back to my office. "Impressive presentation," said Barbara Chen, one of the more independent board members. "I would love to hear more about the customer acquisition strategy when you have time." "Brilliant move with Harrison Financial," Thomas Jenkins added as he passed. "We should discuss integration possibilities for existing client portfolios." The same colleagues who had avoided eye contact that morning now found urgent reasons to stop by my office. Questions about the proposal, offers of support, and expressions of enthusiasm flowed freely from people who had previously ignored my input. The sudden attention was both validating and slightly disorienting after years of operating in the shadows. I had barely settled at my desk when my phone rang with a summons to Alexander's office. I took a moment to compose myself, knowing this confrontation would be challenging. When I entered his spacious corner office, he was standing at the window, back turned dramatically to the door. "Close the door," he said without turning around. I did so, and waited, refusing to break the silence first. Finally, he turned, his expression a careful mask of professional concern. "What you did today was completely inappropriate," he began, his voice controlled but tight with anger. "Going behind my back, behind this company's back, to solicit investment without authorization. I identified a strategic opportunity and developed it," I replied calmly, "which is exactly what we are all supposed to be doing for the benefit of Warren Capital. You deliberately circumvented the chain of command and proper channels. The same channels that have consistently buried my ideas for 6 years," I countered. "The same chain of command that has taken credit for my work while denying me opportunities to advance." His eyes narrowed. "That is not what this is about. This is about loyalty and protocol." "No, Alexander. This is about recognizing good ideas regardless of who presents them. The board certainly seemed to understand the value of what I brought forward today." His composure slipped momentarily. "You have no idea the damage you have done. Harrison Financial holds our primary loan facility. Mixing that relationship with equity investment creates complicated conflicts of interest. Perhaps you should have considered that before dismissing me as having a phantom investor. The conversation continued for nearly 30 minutes, cycling through accusations of disloyalty, threats about professional consequences, and attempts to reframe my actions as harmful to the company. Throughout, I maintained my position that I had acted in Warren Capital's best interests by pursuing a valuable opportunity. The board has already established a committee to move forward, I reminded him as the conversation reached its end. They clearly see the value in this partnership. This is not over, he said as I turned to leave. Not by a long shot. That evening I met Natalie for dinner at a quiet restaurant far from the financial district. She raised her glass in a subtle toast when I arrived. "Congratulations on a successful presentation," she said. "You handled a difficult situation with remarkable poise." "Thank you for being available on such short notice," I replied. "Your timing was perfect." "We have been interested in expanding our relationship with Warren Capital for some time," she explained. "Though I must admit your proposal offered a more innovative approach than we had considered." As we discussed next steps in the investment process, Natalie raised an unexpected possibility. "Regardless of how this particular investment proceeds, we have been impressed with your strategic thinking and execution," she said. "Harrison Financial might be interested in discussing a role for you directly with us, possibly leading a new venture based on your digital investment model." The offer took me by surprise. "You mean, leave Warren Capital?" "It is an option to consider," she replied, "especially if resistance to your leadership continues. We believe in your vision and would provide the resources to implement it properly." The possibility was both tempting and unsettling. Despite years of frustration, I had invested significant time and energy in Warren Capital. The thought of leaving just as my ideas were gaining traction created a strange conflict. "Take some time to think about it," Natalie advised, noting my hesitation. "The offer remains open regardless of what happens with the Warren Capital investment." Back at the office over the following days, Amanda proved an invaluable source of information and support. She reported hearing that Alexander had attempted to contact Natalie directly after the board meeting, presumably to reshape the narrative, or possibly redirect the investment away from my involvement. He is also pushing the finance team to develop alternative options for refinancing the loan facility, she told me during a discreet lunch away from the office, trying to reduce Harrison's leverage. "That would take time we do not have," I noted. "The loan comes due in less than 6 months." While researching components of the due diligence process, I discovered concerning discrepancies in our financial reporting. Certain liability obligations appeared to be classified in ways that minimized their impact on our overall debt profile. Nothing explicitly fraudulent, but certainly misleading to casual scrutiny. "Document everything, but be careful," Amanda advised when I shared my findings. "This crosses from corporate politics into potential regulatory issues. We need to ensure everything is handled properly." The next 2 weeks were intense. I balanced regular work responsibilities with supporting the due diligence process for Harrison's investment and documenting the financial concerns I had identified. Alexander launched a subtle campaign to undermine my credibility with board members, suggesting my inexperience would make me ill-suited to lead the new initiative. He told Eleanor that "your proposal lacks operational depth," Amanda reported, after overhearing a conversation. Said, "You have never managed a team larger than 3 people." Despite these behind-the-scenes maneuvers, preparations continued for a follow-up board meeting to review Harrison's formal investment proposal. The day before the meeting, Alexander distributed an alternative financing proposal he had developed with a consortium of smaller investment firms. This approach provides the capital we need without diluting our operational control. His accompanying memo, explained the implicit criticism of the Harrison proposal clear. The board meeting itself began tensely. Alexander presented his alternative financing option first, emphasizing the clean separation between debt and equity and maintenance of Warren Capital's independent decision-making. Several of his allies on the board nodded approvingly. When Natalie joined via video conference to present Harrison's proposal, the contrast in approaches became clear. Their offer included specific governance provisions, a clear leadership structure for the new division, and detailed accountability metrics. The $50 million investment would provide both the capital for expansion and restructuring of the existing $80 million loan on more favorable terms. This represents a comprehensive approach to Warren Capital's current challenges and future opportunities, Natalie explained. We are not just providing capital, but strategic partnership. The discussion that followed was pointed with Alexander and his supporters, raising concerns about outside influence and dilution of Warren Capital's culture. I addressed each objection with specific details, from the proposal highlighting how the structure preserved independence while providing needed capital and expertise. As the debate continued, it became increasingly clear that the majority of the board favored the Harrison proposal. Even some of Alexander's traditional allies seemed to recognize the superior terms and strategic benefits. When Thomas Jenkins raised questions about leadership for the new division, Natalie was direct. Our investment committee has specified that Maribel Roberts would lead this initiative, she stated. Her vision and expertise are central to the opportunity we see. Alexander's face tightened, but before he could respond, Eleanor shifted the conversation toward a final decision. I believe we have discussed this thoroughly, she said. Unless there are new considerations, I suggest we move to a vote on whether to proceed with Harrison Financial's proposal. The result was 8-4 in favor of accepting Harrison's investment with Alexander, and 3 loyal allies opposed. With the decision made, attention turned to implementation details and next steps in the process. Throughout the remainder of the meeting, I could feel Alexander's cold stare. But for the first time in 6 years, his disapproval had lost its power to intimidate me. The formal agreement with Harrison Financial was signed 3 weeks later, including several provisions that significantly altered Warren Capital's leadership structure. Most notably, the investment terms required Alexander to transition from CEO to a non-executive chairman role, with day-to-day operations passing to a new chief executive to be selected by the board with Harrison's approval. These governance changes are standard for investments of this nature, Natalie explained to the board when the terms were presented. They ensure proper alignment between management execution and strategic vision. The provision clearly targeted Alexander's leadership, a fact not lost on anyone in the room. His supporters objected strenuously, but with the loan renewal leverage Harrison held, their position was ultimately untenable. Alexander himself maintained a rigid, professional demeanor during the discussions, but his barely contained anger was evident in every tense smile and clipped response. In a surprisingly personal moment during a break in the proceedings, Eleanor pulled me aside. The board is considering offering you a senior vice president position, leading the new digital division, she said quietly. Would you be interested? The opportunity represented everything I had worked toward for years: recognition, responsibility, and the chance to implement my vision. Yet I found myself hesitating, recalling Natalie's offer of a position with Harrison Financial. I would need to understand the reporting structure and autonomy, I replied carefully. You would report to the new CEO, once selected, Eleanor explained, but with significant independence in building your division. I asked for time to consider the offer, wanting to weigh all options carefully. The decision would shape not just my career but my daily life and well-being for years to come. The transition period that followed was challenging for everyone at Warren Capital. An interim CEO was appointed from outside the company, a seasoned financial executive named Patricia Winters, who had experience guiding firms through similar transitions. Alexander remained technically involved as chairman, but increasingly absent from day-to-day operations. My role during this period was ambiguous. I had not yet accepted the senior vice president position, but was deeply involved in planning the new division and supporting the broader transition. Board members, who had previously ignored me, now sought my input on strategic questions, and executives who had dismissed my ideas suddenly found them compelling. The psychological adjustment was as significant as the professional one. After years of gaslighting and dismissal, the validation of my capabilities and ideas required a mental recalibration. I found myself hesitating to speak in meetings, not from fear of being ignored, but from the unfamiliar weight of knowing my words would now carry meaningful influence. Amanda provided essential grounding during this period. "Remember who you are and what you know," she advised over coffee one morning. "The only thing that has changed is that others finally see what was always there." Gradually, I began implementing some of the cultural changes I had long believed necessary. I established cross-functional working groups that included junior staff, created more transparent feedback channels, and ensured that ideas were evaluated on merit rather than source. Small changes but significant in shifting how information and innovation flowed through the organization. Throughout these months, I maintained contact with Natalie, who continued to express interest in bringing me directly to Harrison Financial. The decision weighed on me. Do I stay at Warren Capital, where I had history and now growing influence, or move to Harrison, where I would have a fresh start with strong support? The answer became clearer following a chance encounter with Alexander at an industry conference 6 months after the investment. I had just finished participating in a panel discussion on financial technology when I spotted him at the reception, speaking with a group of executives I did not recognize. He saw me at the same moment, and after a visible hesitation approached. "Congratulations on your panel," he said with careful professionalism. "You represented Warren Capital well." "Thank you," I replied, equally formal. An uncomfortable silence followed before he spoke again. "I underestimated you." He admitted the words clearly difficult for him. "That was a mistake I will not repeat." The acknowledgement, however begrudging, provided unexpected closure. Alexander had not become a different person, but the dynamic between us had fundamentally changed. He could no longer dismiss or diminish me without consequence. That evening I called Natalie and accepted her offer to join Harrison Financial as the founding president of a new digital investment subsidiary. The role would allow me to build something from the ground up with resources and support from a firm that had demonstrated respect for my capabilities from our first interaction. I gave Warren Capital a month's notice, using the time to document my work thoroughly and support the transition of my responsibilities. On my final day, Eleanor hosted a small reception where several board members and key executives thanked me for my contributions. "You changed this company more than you know," Barbara told me quietly, "not just through the Harrison investment, but by showing what is possible when good ideas are recognized regardless of source." The journey taught me lessons I carry forward every day. I learned that self-belief must be maintained even when external validation is withheld, that my ideas and capabilities did not become valuable only when others recognized them. They were always valuable. I learned the importance of documentation and preparation, of building relationships with allies who share your values and of persistence in the face of repeated dismissal. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes you must create your own path forward when traditional routes are blocked. The systems and hierarchies that diminish some voices while amplifying others do not change through patient acceptance, but through strategic action and calculated risk. Today, leading my own division with a team that reflects the diversity I always believed strengthens organizations. I make sure that every voice is heard and every contribution acknowledged. The financial results speak for themselves. Our growth has exceeded projections for 6 consecutive quarters. But the culture we have built is what truly matters, creating space for innovation and recognition based on merit rather than privilege. Have you ever had your ideas dismissed only to see them implemented when someone else suggested them? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more workplace justice narratives. Remember to share with anyone who might need this reminder that persistence and strategic thinking can overcome even the most entrenched barriers. Thank you for listening to my journey, and may you find the courage to stand firm in your value even when others fail to recognize it.